everybody. Welcome to Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. Today we're taking all of your leaky gut questions. So if you've got questions about nutrition and gut health, how to overcome leaky gut, fire away in the chat box now. I'll do my best to get as many of those answered as we possibly can. Also, if you missed the crash course on leaky gut, super in-depth class, we did that video on Tuesday. You can check that out. I'll put a link below if you missed it. You need to go back and check that out. It's a lot of information, but I think could save a lot of you a lot of time, grief, and trouble in terms of your journey to try to overcome problems revolving around leaky gut. So let's talk leaky gut. First question from Tana. I'm taking your multi-omegas gluten shield, ran out of your probiotic, have been struggling with chronic bathroom issues. Anything I can do to help calm down visits to the restroom? So there's a couple of reasons people develop diarrhea. Again, simple, low-hanging fruit reasons, Tana. One is you're eating a food that your body is rejecting, and so you're having diarrhea as a result of your body's intelligence, right? So your body's saying, get that food out. We don't like it. It's hurting us. So you might consider getting tested for food sensitivities and food allergies to see if there's something that you're consuming that might be triggering that. One of the other reasons this happens, though, is microbial overgrowth or imbalance. So you could have, for example, a bacterial overgrowth or a yeast overgrowth or parasitic overgrowth in your GI tract itself, creating the mechanism, the defense mechanism of the body. One of the ways the body is, again, trained to get rid of overgrowth or abnormal quantities of abnormal bacteria or other microorganisms is diarrhea. So if that's something you're experiencing, check food, check for microbial imbalances. The third thing that you can do in that situation is, get back on the probiotics. And if you want a heavier hitting probiotic, a lot of people that struggle with diarrhea that's not food or microbial related do tend to do really, really well with higher dose probiotics. So you might check out our Ultrabiotic defense instead of the regular strength. The Ultrabiotic defense has about 225 billion colony forming units per dose. So it's just a much higher quantity than the regular strength biotic defense. So doing that might also be helpful as well. Also consider if you're using a bunch of other supplements that have osmotic effects. If you're overtaking magnesium, if you're overtaking vitamin C, some people overdo these. They have good intentions because these are good nutrients to take and supplement with. But if you do too much, you can also end up with loose bowels and diarrhea. Okay, how long does it take for glyphosate to leave your body? It's a tricky question because, Linda, the biggest part of that question is how often are you getting exposure, or are you still getting exposure? Because it's not going to permanently get out of your body if you have an ongoing source where you're being exposed to it. So step one for any kind of detox analysis question is, are you still being exposed, right? Because you cannot detox. Your body can't get rid of something that, consistently if you're being exposed to it on a daily basis. Let's see here. How do I bulk up and put on mass without grains or gluten? I know that I'm gluten sensitive. I do engage in weight training 4 days a week. It seems that when I cut grains, I lose unwanted weight. I mean, it depends on how you're trying to bulk up, JT. If you're trying to build lean muscle mass, you don't need gluten or grains in your diet. I at my peak, my younger years, I was 200 pounds. I'm only 5'8", and I was 200 pounds of solid muscle. So you can put, and that was grain-free, so you can put plenty of mass on. One of the biggest struggles that people have with keeping their mass up is they're not getting adequate calories for the level of exercise that they're doing. So if you're working out in the gym 4 days a week and they're pretty intense workouts, you got to make sure you're getting adequate protein. And on ideal, depending on your age and depending on, again, the aggressive nature of your workouts, you need to be at least, 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and probably closer to 2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight if you're really trying to add mass. The other thing that you might consider doing is using a branched chain amino acid supplement that contains valine, leucine, and isoleucine. These will help add mass, as well as L-glutamine. And also look at creatine as a supplement. Anywhere from 5 to 10 grams of creatine a day post-workout can really help saturate the muscle's creatine systems, which will help make your workouts more effective. When you can get that extra edge with creatine, it can build muscle more quickly. So those are just some quick tips on that front. Let's see here. Does your genetic testing cover other foods or just glutens? Can you explain more about what this testing can and can't tell me? Sure, Elaine. Genetic testing is just going to tell you about gluten grains. Okay, so if you're trying to figure out whether you're gluten sensitive and need to cut grains out of your diet, the genetic testing is the right test to do. If you're trying to ascertain whether or not you're reacting to other types of foods, not grains, but other types of foods, for example, blueberries, broccoli, cauliflower, onions, etc., then our food sensitivity test would be the one that you would want to do. So we keep them separate for a reason, because a lot of people that come to Gluten-Free Society just want to know about gluten. That genetic test, again, that's what's going to measure whether you have the genetic predisposition to react, for your immune system to react to glutens, the different types of gluten. So again, better type of test if you're just trying to find out gluten. If you're trying to find out other foods, you're already gluten-free and you already know you're gluten sensitive and you just want to know, am I missing some other type of food? You need to check out our food sensitivity, our delayed food sensitivity testing. How do you gain weight on a leaky gut diet? You eat enough calories. I mean, the biggest problem, there's so much information out on the net about leaky gut. And one of the biggest pieces of advice that sometimes gets misconstrued is intermittent fasting or fasting as a strategy to overcome leaky gut. Now, if you've been advised to do fasting, you want to understand one thing. If you fast too much, you're not going to put weight on, because when you're fasting, you're not eating. And when you're not eating, you're not getting calories. And when you're not getting calories, you're not getting nutrients from the food. And therefore, you're not going to have what you need to put any weight on. Then there's intermittent fasting. So some people do like 1-day fast, 3-day fast, 5-day fast. Look, you're going to lose weight if you're trying to implement that on a consistent basis in your day-to-day. If you're doing intermittent fasting, the biggest mistake I see people make is they're doing intermittent fasting with calorie restriction. And here's what I mean by that. If you're doing like a 16-8, where you eat all of your meals in an 8-hour window and the rest of the day, that 16 hours, the other 16 hours you're not eating, you have to make sure you're getting ample calories for your body's needs in that 8-hour window. Or if you're doing a 20-hour or what's called a 4-20, where your fasting period is 20 hours, but your meal consumption is within a 4-hour time frame. A lot of people, when they're doing these 16-8s or these 24 fasts, intermittent fasting programs, the window of food consumption is such a short window for them that they can't eat enough calories to give their body what it needs to gain weight. And so what they're actually doing is they're not really intermittent fasting. They're on an intermittent fast, but they're in a calorically restricted state because they're full all the time because they can't eat enough food in that window of fast or that window of meal opportunity. They're full too much and they just don't eat enough. So you have to keep in mind, if you're trying these intermittent fasting strategies, the point of intermittent fasting is not to restrict your calories, it's to restrict your eating window. So you have to make sure you're getting enough calories for you to be able to put on weight. Now, if you're not familiar with BMR, BMR is a term we use in nutrition, and it stands for basic metabolic rate, BMR. If you go online and you type in BMR calculator, you're going to find all kinds of options for calculators where you can put in your age, your height, your weight, and your gender. And it's going to give you an estimation of how many calories a day that you burn at rest. That's your BMR. It's how many calories a day you burn at rest. So go determine what your BMR is and then adjust for your exercise. Usually these BMR calculators will have a little segment in them too that allows you to adjust for how much exercise you do, because when you exercise, you burn more calories. So you take your BMR with the adjustment for your exercise, and that's going to give you a certain quantity of calories. And if you're not eating that certain quantity, if you're not eating enough, you're going to lose weight. It's that simple. It's not like a magic thing. You just have to make sure you're eating enough calories to either sustain your current weight at your current exercise or fitness level, or eat more calories than what your body currently needs if you're trying to gain weight. And remember that 3,500 calories is equivalent to 1 pound. So if you're trying to gain a pound a week, you have to increase your calorie value by 500 pounds a day. And so again, it just depends on your BMR. So hopefully that helps give you the tools you need to kind of determine that. Can leaky gut come from glyphosates? Yes, but no, leaky gut cannot, Alicia, come from MTHFR. There's so much junk out there on MTHFR. Look, if you have an MTHFR mutation, I have them all. I'm going to raise my hand. I have all the MTHFR mutations you can have. I have A to C and I have C to T, and I'm homozygous for both. And I'm not struggling because of those mutations. I'm actually doing quite fine. MTHFR is not the doomsday gene. You are not going to have bad health just because you have MTHFR. The issue with MTHFR is if you have those mutations and you subject yourself to multiple toxins, then you are more apt to become sick faster than everyone else. That's it. But please don't have this misinterpretation that because you have MTHFR that you're somehow doomed, or that you have this genetic curse that you can't overcome. So never try to blame MTHFR on your health problems. That's my point. Now, can glyphosate cause leaky gut? It absolutely can. And so this is one of the reasons why we want to justify looking at organic food over non-organic food, or grow your own food. But glyphosate's no joke. It's poison, and it's a major problem in our society today. And you want to do everything you possibly can to avoid it and keep it out of your diet. Okay, let's see here. Okay, answer that one. How long does it take to fix leaky gut? Isa, I want you to go back and watch the video I did on Tuesday. I answered that exact question in great detail, but I'm going to give you a general answer here. But I want you to go back and watch that video so you can get the depth of the knowledge from it. It takes anywhere from 18 months to 3 years for most people, depending on whether or not they have discovered all the different triggers and they're addressing all the different triggers for their leaky gut. How do I realize that my celiac disease is in remission based on symptoms or based on labs? Both. Really, ideally, both is the proper way to answer that. Part of it depends on how you were diagnosed. If you were diagnosed with celiac disease through a biopsy of your small intestine, meaning they found villus atrophy on a biopsy, a lot of doctors want to repeat that test after, a certain prolonged period of being on a gluten-free diet. So that's one way they're going to tell you you're in remission, is if your biopsy no longer shows atrophy. But the other is to look at the antibodies. If you had positive serology or positive antibody tests for gluten, a lot of times the doctors are going to want you, they'll have you on a gluten-free diet, and then they'll come back and they'll remeasure your antibody levels and make sure that that your levels are coming down. So if your antibody levels are coming down and your villus atrophy is going away and you feel better, that's a good kind of place to be, right? And so that's how you would really know. Now, what I have seen happen is I've seen some people do really, really well. Their symptoms have dramatically reduced. They're not perfectly healthy. They're not where they want to be. And sometimes what we find is their antibody levels for gluten are still high, meaning they're still getting some exposure in somewhere in their diet or through cross-contamination. And so that can be an issue. And this is one reason why, if you've tested originally, were diagnosed because of positive antibodies, that you want to go back and have your doctor reevaluate those antibodies, just to make sure that your diet is clean and that you're not getting that exposure to cross-contamination. I've actually seen clients where I had one gentleman who worked next door to a donut shop, and they shared air ducts. And so he was breathing in wheat flour all day long at work, and his antibodies weren't coming down. He cut gluten out of his diet. He was feeling better, but his antibodies weren't fully coming down. And so we had to figure that out. I had another client, she was a baker, and she actually owned a bakery, and she was in a bakery all day long breathing in wheat flour and wheat dust. And so her levels wouldn't come down either until we got her out of that environment. So again, there are times where looking at those antibody tests can be very, very helpful, especially if that's how you were diagnosed. Are ultra nutrients easy to absorb if you have a leaky gut problem? Yes. So understand that leaky gut doesn't mean your gut doesn't absorb. It actually is the opposite. Leaky gut means things are coming from your gut and they're getting into your bloodstream too readily, too easily without being properly checked. So leaky gut, as a general rule of thumb, doesn't mean that you're malabsorbing. Now, there are tests that you can ask your doctor to run that can determine whether or not you have malabsorption problems. The ones that we generally see where they struggle to absorb properly, those are the ones with severe chronic diarrhea. So if you have that, you might consider that you're malabsorbing. Those are the ones that have fat in their stool. There's a type of test you can ask for. It's called a fecal fat test, or a fat stain test. And your GI doctor could order it, your GP could order it. It's just one way to understand whether you're malabsorbing fat. So there's also tests that can be run, blood tests that can be run to determine whether or not you're producing adequate digestive enzymes to help you digest and absorb the nutrients from your food. And so you can also ask for pancreatic panels as well. So those are just things you can ask for to determine whether or not you are losing your capacity to digest and absorb your food. But as a general rule of thumb, yes, you're going to do well absorbing nutrients from supplements, even if you have a leaky gut. And so a lot of people, that's a good question, because a lot of people ask, am I wasting my money on supplements if I have a leaky gut? No, you're not. And sometimes supplements help dig you out of that hole because you need nutrients. Remember, you need to feed your gut nutrients, because 60% of the nutrition that feeds the gut comes from what you put in your mouth. So even if it's not fully absorbing, it is fueling the cells of your intestine to heal and repair and to maintain themselves. Okay, so Elsie asks, if leaky gut causes the immune system to make antibodies to various foods, how do you prevent this antibody response once the gut is healed? The response normalizes with time. So once you seal the gut lining and it's no longer aggressively leaking, you do want to do an elimination diet of those foods you're reactive to. That's an important part of this. Remember, your immune cells are brand new every 6 to 8 months. So if you are reacting to certain foods because you've developed those reactions because your gut's leaking, the best thing to do is know what those foods are, get tested, then eliminate them. As you heal your leaky gut, you get through 6 to 8 months of avoiding those foods that your body is sensitive to, and your immune system will reset. That's the ideal of how to go about this. So at least strategically. Now, if you haven't had any proper testing done, then it's hard to know. But again, the key is you avoid the foods that your immune system is reacting to for a long enough period so that your immune system resets, while simultaneously sealing up the gut lining by avoiding the things that cause leaky gut to occur. Let's see. Netherlands and Belgium, most PFAS is sprayed on fruit and vegetables compared to the rest of the EU. It's also 3 times in the past 10 years. I don't know do you mean PFAS? Do you mean perfluoroalkyl substances? Is that what you're referring to as an acronym, or is this a mistypo and you mean PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids? Can you clarify for me as far as that goes? And the answer to the question of can perfluoroalkyl substances cause leaky gut, the answer is absolutely yes. It can damage your gut. As a matter of fact, there's some really great studies done during the pandemic where because PFAS is it's a chemical that's also sprayed on masks. They waterproof the masks, and what they were finding in people wearing masks all the time is their immune systems were being dramatically hindered because they were breathing in PFASs, and again, just not a good thing to be exposed to. They now sometimes they call them forever chemicals because they're extremely hard for your body to get rid of and break down. So you want to do your best to avoid them at all costs. Which is better for immune system, vitamin C as calcium ascorbate or sodium ascorbate? It's not that one is necessarily better, Robert. They're both good. They're both buffered. I would say the better answer to that question is what's the vitamin C derived from? because most of the vitamin C's that we come across are corn, our GMO corn vitamin C's. And so I don't recommend those. That's why we have our Detox C, which is buffered with calcium and magnesium and other minerals as well. But it's as long as it's buffered, we want it to be buffered because it reduces the acidic nature. So if you do have problems in your gut with erosions or other things, that vitamin C is just not going to feel like alcohol being poured on a scab. Once our gut heals, will I be less sensitive to certain foods? Yeah, I think I kind of answered that question a moment ago, Crystal, which is when your gut heals and you do food avoidance and you can start bringing those foods back after your immune system resets. But again, it takes 6 to 8 months for the immune system to reset. So when you're doing food avoidance to things you know you're reactive to, you have to go at least that length of time to allow your immune cells to give birth to new immune cells that are no longer reacting to those same foods. Let's see. My husband's blood pressure has been high for a while. His PCP has mentioned he's stuck in fight or flight mode. Is there anything that we can do to help with that? So specifically for fight or flight mode, well, the $1 million question there is, if he's stuck in fight or flight, Ruth, why? There's a lot of things that can put a person in fight or flight mode. It could be, for a man, it could be his job. It could be his work relations. It could be things going on at home. It could be different stressors, but it could also be foods. The wrong foods can drive up fight or flight. One of the consequences or side effects to eating something that you're allergic to is your body in response will produce adrenaline and noradrenaline, which are the neurotransmitters of the sympathetic nervous system. So basically what that means is you can eat foods that cause you to go into fight or flight or stay into fight or flight. This is why a lot of people develop anxiety or heart palpitations or high blood pressure or elevated pulse when they eat foods that they shouldn't be eating. And so you would want to help him to determine what those things may be. But you'd also want to look at the rest of his diet and his lifestyle to say, okay, what else is he doing that may be driving him into a fight or flight state? And so, you can have, again, food can be the cause there. Other chemical exposures can be the cause. Not having adequate quantities of the right nutrients can also be a cause. So for example, vitamin C deficiency can keep a person in fight or flight. Choline deficiency can keep a person in fight or flight. B vitamin deficiencies can keep a person in fight or flight. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that should give you a good places to start. How do I get a protocol to heal leaky gut? Does he have a book? Yeah, I do, Johnny. Check out my book, No Grain, No Pain. You can pick it up at any major bookstore. You can pick it up off of Amazon as well. And it gives you an exact specific diet protocol and lifestyle protocol to begin this journey and start really taking control. Okay, so what do I have to do except, make sure I understand this question. So Mira from Holland is asking, she's celiac and 100% on a grain-free diet, all organic cooking at home, but still have leaky gut. Not sure I understand. So it sounds like you also have a fungal problem and your doctor gave you fluconazole, which is an antifungal for 2 weeks. So the best thing I'm not sure 100% what your question is because there's a lot there to unpack, but I would say that if you're following No Grain, No Pain and you're on a good probiotic and you're on a good omega-3 and it sounds like you're taking some other nutrients, that's all fine. But if you have yeast overgrowth, remember yeast can be a primary driver for leaky gut. So you definitely want to work with your doctor to get that under control. But one other thing that you might also consider is, are you reacting to healthy foods? This is another issue and another thing that happens so think of it like this. Once you develop leaky gut, you can acquire food sensitivities, meaning you can start developing reactions to foods that you didn't used to have reactions to. And once you start developing reactions to foods, those reactions will cause a continual progressive leakiness of your GI tract. In other words, if something entirely different caused your leaky gut, once your gut starts leaking, you can now be reacting to new things, and those new things can perpetuate your leaky gut. So it's key, get with your doctor to get the right testing done to identify the other foods that may also be contributing, because you could be eating some really healthy foods, right, that are organic and you're cooking at home. But if you're reacting to those foods, then you're still going to struggle to recover from that leaky gut. And then the follow-up question to that is, if you have celiac disease, is it always a challenge to heal leaky gut? And the answer is no. It's no more challenging to get a celiac to overcome leaky gut than it is anyone else. Don't get that idea in your head, because that's not, one, it's not helpful for you. And two, it's just not true. I'm suffering from stomach acidity 12 to 13 years after H. pylori infection. After that, off and on stomach acidity. Doctors only advise PPIs, and that PPIs are not effective. So you may not have stomach acidity. You may have stomach alkalinity. Most people that have been told they have acid reflux don't really have too much acid. They have damage to their stomach. And so when they make acid, the damaged area of their stomach is irritated, and so it hurts. So, now you can have H. pylori, and you should be remeasured for H. pylori if you haven't been, because H. pylori can become a problem and cause these types of symptoms. But a lot of people, it's not that they make too much stomach acid, it's that their stomachs are damaged by something. And so what do we see damage the stomach? For most people, it's either food or microbes. Those two things can damage the stomach lining. That way, once it's damaged, you make acid. That acid's an irritant to the area that's damaged. So one of the things that people find effective and helpful, at least to soothe the gut, it doesn't solve the problem completely, but it can be helpful, is the use of mucilaginous types of supplements. So things like aloe vera or GI soothe with a number of these different types of things in it that you take. And what it does is it just puts down a soothing lining of mucus over the stomach. So if there are areas that are damaged, then you're less apt to be symptomatic. And so a lot of times, just like if you have that damages there, look, every time you eat, it's just going to hurt because there's damage. So if you can do something to kind of coat that lining, that allows that damage to heal. But ultimately, you have to ask why the damage occurred in the first place. Because if you don't have the answer to that question, all the supplements in the world are not going to help you. You're just going to get temporary relief. After recovery of leaky gut, how long does it take to get rid of food intolerance? It takes, again, about 6 to 8 months. I think I answered that one earlier, Maria. But about 6 to 8 months. Remember, your immune system recycles every 6 to 8 months. So it takes that long. You want to get beyond one generation of immune cells to the next for them to calm down. Was told by live blood analysis that I'm infected with a parasite called Coxus, which lays its eggs in the red blood cells. Been having GI issues for months. Are these parasites that actually? I would be very reticent to agree with the statement of what you were told. Live blood analysis is fine. I'm not saying that it can't be a helpful tool for a doctor to help you, but it's not, I wouldn't call it a definitive way to tell you whether or not you have a parasite. And I think a lot of practitioners try to do that, and they're wrong. That's just my experience. I heard from, so this is just a follow-up to this prior question, which was, I have been told I have acid reflux. So if you've had biopsies and you've had scopes done and there's no damage that they can see, then the problem is probably got more to do with the fact that you're not making enough stomach acid. And so when you eat, your food doesn't digest very well. With low stomach acid, you can actually cause irritation because now food's not digesting. And so that food putrefies in your gut. And when it rots inside of you, it creates irritants that irritate you and make you feel pain. So that could be another issue that you're dealing with. You could also have bacterial overgrowth that's causing a lot of pain through pressure. And again, those are just theories. You need to get those tested. Go look at getting those things tested. There's a special type of test called a pH endoscopy where they can actually have you swallow a pill. That pill measures the pH of your stomach. And if your stomach pH is too high, and not acidic enough, this could be an indicator that, again, that's why you have that problem. And in those cases, it's helpful to do things like take supplemental acid before you eat. Some people use apple cider vinegar as an acid, as a mild acid to put on the stomach before a meal, but you can also do things like betaine hydrochloride. We have a product called Ultra Acid that has several ingredients that can help support your digestion when you're not producing adequate stomach acid. Let's see, Jim says, could you repeat the mucilage stomach aids? Yeah, so deglycerinized licorice, marshmallow root, aloe vera are 3 really strong and good ones. There's also okra. Okra can, the seed of okra has a really great mucus that it produces that can help coat and line your gut as well. So Mara says, thank you for your time and education. How do you know you healed your gut? Have no allergies except gluten and lactose. No pains, 100% gluten grain-free, but still get different things as fungus, Helicobacter bacteria. What's going on in my system? Even though I take lots of mineral vitamins, train and sleep well. I mean, if you have a bacterial overgrowth, that has to be dealt with. You can have your food part dialed in, but remember, there's 2 major components that damage the GI tract or prevent it from fully healing. I mean, the first thing is you're eating things that are poisonous to you, whether it's a food reaction or whether it's something in your food. Again, some food isn't food, but we call it food. For example, fast food and processed food, that's garbage. Those are chemicals, and those chemicals can hurt your gut. But then the other thing that can damage your gut is microorganisms. So overgrowth of fungus or Helicobacter pylori could certainly be, a major culprit you just haven't dealt with yet. And so if that's the case, you really got to get with your doctor to do the proper testing to identify and to rectify that situation. If you're celiac and eat gluten, your body attacks itself. Does the same thing happen with other foods you're allergic to? Yes. Great question, Sandra. Yes, it does. You get food sensitivity, food allergy can contribute to autoimmune disease. It's not just gluten. Gluten is just the most famous, if you will, or the most well-studied, and generally it tends to get all the credit, but there are plenty of other foods that people are reacting to that can drive or trigger inflammatory reactions against themselves. And so that's what we would call autoimmunity, right? Okay. Can leaky gut cause psychological problems? And can leaky gut be without any gut issues or symptoms? Well, it certainly can cause psychological problems. There's actually a whole plethora of data now coming out on one of the causes of leaky gut being abnormal levels of bacteria in the GI tract. And these abnormal bacteria allow for an opening up of the gut junctions. But these abnormal bacteria can also have been linked to or associated with depression and with bipolar and other mental or psychological disorders. So definitely the case. I have avoided eggs for years, but I recently tried them again and they made me feel nauseated. Does that mean my leaky gut is still not healed? No, it doesn't necessarily mean your leaky gut's not healed, but it means your body doesn't like eggs. There's 3 rules of eating that we try to adhere to no matter who you are, right? Rule number 1, you can't get healthy eating food that's not healthy. That's what I call the common sense rule. Quick quiz. Is soda healthy? Hopefully you guys said no. Is candy healthy? Hopefully you guys said no. Is eating foods doused in pesticide healthy? Hopefully you guys are saying no in your mind, right? So that's rule 1. Rule number 2, listen to your body. It talks to you. If you eat something and your body's rejecting it or your body doesn't feel good after you eat it, stop it. Quit doing it. Don't just take a Tums and move on. Don't take a drug or a supplement to suppress the symptom and keep doing the thing that your body is trying to tell you to quit doing. So that's second rule. And then the third rule is don't eat what you're sensitive, allergic, or intolerant to. And if you're allergic to something, most of you will know because the symptoms can be quite acute. If you're intolerant to something, most of you know because the symptoms are typically digestive in nature. So gas, bloating, intestinal discomfort because you can't digest what you just ate. But if you're sensitive to a food, you may not have an aggressive symptom. And that's the trickiest part of all of this, is that you can develop delayed responses to foods that just cause low-grade levels of inflammation that continue to persist as long as you're eating them. But bottom line is, if you eat a food and that food causes you to have symptoms that are not good, listen to your body and quit eating that food. I take care of a man with Down syndrome and he has celiac. My colleagues feed him gluten foods and disregard my warnings about doing so. It's in his chart. Is this neglect or abuse? It absolutely is neglect and abuse. I would wrangle those colleagues up and I would have them fired and I would press charges. If that were my family member that was being taken care of and I was paying for somebody to take care of him and they were poisoning him on purpose, you bet we would have attorneys and we would have everything lined up and we would crucify those people for doing that. Now, especially if they're doing it on purpose. Now, if they just are demeaning, look, they shouldn't even be working in a healthcare facility. If their job is to take care of somebody and it's in his chart that he has celiac disease, they should know better. They just should be fired. I would do everything in my power to get those people out of there. Just imagine if it were your family member. Imagine if it were somebody you cared about and they were neglecting that individual and poisoning that individual on purpose. It's just terrible. How do you feel about the carnivore diet for leaky gut? It just depends. I mean, some people do really well on a carnivore diet, and I'm not opposed to it. However, there also are many people that go carnivore and they're also reactive to some of the foods they're eating on a carnivore diet. I mean, I see people all the time that are sensitive to beef or that are sensitive to pork or chicken. And if that's part of their carnivore diet, it's not going to fully heal their problem. So as a general rule, if you want to attempt a carnivore diet, some people do well on that. But if you're sensitive to some of those meats and you're eating them on a regular basis, you're going to still struggle to overcome that leakiness. Stomach pains on and off for years. Endoscopy and scans in 2017, they were clear. Current gastro doc wants to redo endoscopy and colonoscopy, CT scan with contrast on the stomach and pelvis. I mean, if you've already had all that done and it was negative, why would it be different today if your symptoms haven't really changed? So I wouldn't, I mean, you could certainly go do those tests. I don't want to discourage you from getting valid data. Where I would be leery would be the CT scan. If it were my body, the CT scan is worth about 1,000 X-rays and radiation. So don't take that kind of scan lightly. You don't want to just do them just because. And the contrast dyes are another part of the problem because a lot of people react to the contrast dyes or do poorly after the contrast dyes. Actually, if you go look up, most of you probably know the famed actor Chuck Norris. His wife is super, super sick as a result of these contrast dyes. So I never look at diagnostic testing with contrast dyes lightly. I mean, there are times where there may be a condition where you would want to have it done, but just be cautious and careful. I would argue that if you're the same as you were in 2017 and you've already had all these tests done, you probably aren't going to find an answer by repeating these tests, right? What's the definition of insanity? It's repetitive behavior with the expectation of a different outcome. And so you might want to ask your GI doctor about doing other types of tests, right? Maybe asking them to do a culture of your GI tract, maybe asking them to assess your liver and your ability to produce digestive enzymes and your pancreatic function, because if you have, enzymatic deficiencies, that can cause pain in your stomach off and on as well. So again, go after and look at it differently. Don't look at it the same. How long does it take to develop leaky gut, and how long does it take to recover if you do all perfectly right? Again, it depends on what's causing your leaky gut. It's hard to give you an exact, but you can develop leaky gut immediately. You can have a bacterial infection that releases a bacterial toxin that strips your gut lining down right now, within minutes. So leaky gut can develop relatively quick. And we saw a lot of this in this past year where there was an enterovirus going around. And so there was a virus going around our community where people's guts were becoming leaky really, really fast as a result of viral infections in the GI tract. So leaky gut can happen very fast. As far as how long does it take to repair, you've got to get rid of what's causing it. And as long as you do that, remember the gut is a quick healer. Where most people fail is they don't have all the information to embark on this journey in a proper way. So they're those of you that say I've been struggling with leaky gut for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, it's because you don't have all the information. If the only thing that was causing your leaky gut was a viral infection and you get that viral infection under control and it goes away, and your leaky gut is going to heal relatively quickly. Your gut lining is brand new every 2 to 7 days. So it's not a slow healer. But that being said, you've got to have all the other data and information. Are there other things beyond what you currently know that are also contributing to it? Leaky gut, generally, there are acute scenarios that cause leaky gut immediately. But for most people who've been struggling chronically, there's probably 30 or 40 different triggers, and you just don't know what they all are because you haven't had appropriate testing done. And so you're continuing to struggle because you haven't dealt with all the different triggers. My wife has a titanium chip in her breast since the age of 26, found by a radiologist to pinpoint the dense breast. She's 60, it has not caused problems. Should she get it removed? If it's not causing problems, there's an old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And, you got to weigh the risk and the benefit of surgical removal of something like that. What are the risks associated with the surgical removal? They have to put her under, the risk of deformity of her breast. These are not small things to consider. So, now it's different if she were reacting to the chip and had autoimmune disease and you suspected that chip was creating or contributed to it, then it's a no-brainer, talk to a surgeon and get it scheduled. But if it's not a problem, it may not become a problem. She's 60. There's a lot of risk-benefit analysis that should be done, Robert, to assess whether or not it's the right thing for her to do. Can low elastase be healed? Yes, it can. Low elastase is typically an indicator of pancreatic insufficiency, and when the pancreas isn't working properly, there's usually a trigger that's damaging the pancreas, thus making the elastase levels low. But it can be healed. Can the ratio, so a ratio of HA to VMA is not something that needs to be healed or not healed. And I would argue that those tests that use HA VMA ratios, from urine analysis are very limited in their capacity to give you any useful information at all. Breaking out and can't absorb nutrients, I would argue that's not true. Not that you're not breaking out, but that you're not absorbing nutrients. If you're not absorbing nutrients, you're going to waste away and die. But the breaking out part, certainly. Cannot seem to get celiac under control, even with thyroid meds and a grain-free diet. You need to look into the masterclass if you haven't watched that yet. Glutenology.net/registration. We'll put a link up. It's 14 hours long. And if you're a celiac and you're still struggling, there's a lot in this class. I go super, super deep in this class, and I'll give you the strategies of things that a lot of celiacs continue to struggle with or need to make changes in other ways. So I highly encourage you to watch that free class. What causes globulin to be low? Is it inflammation in your gut? It can be, Tanya. I mean, globulin is an immune protein in your blood, right? And so if it's low, you could be not eating enough protein. You could also have chronic inflammation, and so your immune system's under chronic stress, and so you can't keep up with the globulin production, and so your globulin over time starts to drop. So, meaning there's a lot of reasons why that could be low. My son has low butyrate, inflammation, and low fatty short chain. I assume you mean short chain fatty acids. Butyrate can be supplemented. It can also be eaten. There's a number of foods. Actually, let's put a link up to our crash course on butyrate for Angel. As far as the inflammation, you got to figure out what's causing it. Again, you know, anytime somebody tells you you're inflamed or you have inflammation, when the doctor says you have inflammation, the first words out of your mouth should be, why do I have inflammation? Not how are you going to give me a medicine to suppress it, right? Because it's coming from somewhere. It's like having a leak in your house. Well, your pipe is leaking water. Well, let's put a bucket down and let's catch the water instead of trying to figure out why the pipe is leaking, right? Ultimately, the pipe will break and it's going to flood your house. This is the same thing with inflammation. If you've got inflammation, you got to figure out why. There are lots of drivers of inflammation. Food can be a driver. Chemical exposures can be a driver. Microbial imbalances can be a driver. Nutritional deficits can be a driver. Figure that out. Don't just suppress it. And that includes don't suppress it with supplements, right? So many people just want to take turmeric or, you know, some type of anti-inflammatory, you know, supplement as a magic, you know, antidote or pill, but you're not doing yourself any favors if you don't know why your inflammation exists. Should I avoid gluten if my body does handle it quite well up to now? Are you gluten sensitive? The people that should avoid gluten are the people that are gluten sensitive. Other people that may want to avoid gluten are people that have oxalate problems because grains are extremely high in oxalate. And so if you have a history of something like kidney stones or unexplainable arthritis, you know, it's very common that oxalate issues can drive or cause those types of problems. So there's more than one reason to avoid grain. If you haven't read No Grain, No Pain, I go into all of those reasons for grain avoidance. Not just gluten. It's more than gluten. It's beyond just gluten. But many of people are gluten sensitive, and there is something called silent gluten sensitivity or silent celiac disease, and that has to do with the fact that gluten can break down into morphine-like proteins, and morphine is a pain blocker. So some researchers believe that gluten can mask its own toxicity by breaking down into morphine substances that act to basically suppress the symptoms that it's causing you to have. And in that regard, it gets a lot trickier than just, I don't feel bad today because I ate some pasta. You could be still having a problem. A lot of people with silent celiac disease never get a diagnosis until they have cancer, and then they get their diagnosis. But they've been eating gluten their whole life, doing that damage, that silent damage the whole time. So your direct symptoms are not an absolute as to whether or not you're gluten sensitive, although listening to your symptoms is a great place to start. Whether or not you're having them is not always the right answer. How does one get off of PPI's protonics for acid reflux? The best way is to taper it. Work with your doctor, taper it. So getting off of PPIs, you'd first go to over-the-counter, something like a Tagamet over-the-counter as you're making that taper. Again, do that with your doctor. And then as you're on Tagamet for a time, you start adding, we use our product called GI Soothe to help people do this. Again, it's a mucilaginous that can coat and line the stomach and proximal small intestine. And so we just do this slowly over time, because the key with the PPI is if you cold turkey try to quit it, you're going to have what's called severe acid reflux, rebound reflux, right? And it's very painful. So do it slowly. Don't get in a hurry. Start tapering your PPI over to Tagamet or Zantac over the counter. And then from there, go to a mucilaginous product that coats and lines your gut. But ultimately, Mike, find out why you had heartburn in the first place. Like, if you haven't figured that piece out yet and you start tapering, you may not feel any better with the taper. You've got to figure out what was driving the process in the first place. After gallbladder, that's not a question. Can you tell me if it's okay to do red light every morning for depression and energy? First thing in the morning. If so, how many minutes? Don't want to over or underdo it. It's really hard to overdo red light therapy. I mean, I wouldn't sit there and just open your eyes right into the powerful red lights and just stare right into it, especially if your eyes are not adjusting to it very well. But there's no danger in doing red light therapy every morning. I actually personally do it for about 20 minutes every morning. So No danger in it. Is there a trigger for food sensitivities? There's lots of them. You know, go back to answer this question. We talked about this in the show on Tuesday, where I showed you all the triggers, all the different types of triggers for leaky gut. Anything that's a trigger for leaky gut is going to also, over a long enough period of time, if you don't take care of it, is going to contribute to the development of new food sensitivities. So when we say what causes food sensitivities, it's the triggers for leaky gut. So then how do we reverse food sensitivities? Is we take away the leaky gut triggers and we give our immune system enough time to reset. Paulina says, Dr. Osborne, do you offer a food sensitivity test? What's the website for that? Yes. Can we put a link up for Paulina on YouTube? It's Gluten-Free Society is our website, Paulina, but we're going to have a link for that exact testing put up for you. Can you substantially improve leaky gut with mold? Trying to figure out what to prioritize first. Gut support, micronutrient testing, food allergy testing, mold. If you're in mold, the number one thing you need to do is get out of mold. That's the priority, right? Think of mold as, that's your air, right? So if you're living in mold and the mold is bad, not only are you surrounded by mold spores that can create allergenic reactions and distract your immune system from its work, but molds produce VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and different types of mycotoxins that are very dangerous. They can be damaging to your gut, damaging to your brain, damaging to your nervous system, damaging to your immune system. They can cause cancer. They can cause kidney damage. I mean, they're not good, right? Ultimately, most mycotoxins cause DNA, RNA, and protein synthesis suppression. So they suppress your body's ability to make new tissue and heal and repair itself. You'll never heal if you're in mold. No matter what supplement you take, no matter what micronutrients you take, you'll never heal while you're in mold. So if you strongly suspect you're in mold, number one thing you can do is get out of the mold. So there's two ways to get out of mold. If the mold is in your house, you can leave your house. Now, not everybody can just pick up and leave their house, but if your mold is in your house and you want to stay in your house, then you need to have a forensic investigation of where the mold is and why the mold is growing and get that fixed. That's called remediation. And it's an important step if you suspect that you have mold. Mold is no joke. I would argue in my experience over the past several decades of care with folks is the person can change their diet beautifully, perfectly. They can change their lifestyle beautifully, perfectly. They don't heal when they're still in mold. These are the toughest and most challenging cases I've seen, in more than 20 years of experience. So if you're trying to prioritize something to do and you're pretty certain you're in mold, that's your number one priority. You can't survive and thrive when the air you're breathing is poisoning you every day. You've got to escape the poison. I did a food sensitivity analysis. Is a high level of IgG antibodies to foods a real indicator of sensitivity? No. IgG tests are misleading, Philip, and I don't recommend them. Does taking glucomannan fiber before each meal help leaky gut for RA? Not really. I mean, it might be somewhat helpful, but it's not a cure. It's not going to reverse your problem. I'm very skinny. My abdomen is always very hard and protrudes, even if I haven't eaten for a day and it isn't muscle. Does that sound like leaky gut? Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, it could be. I mean, if your abdomen's that hard, you've got microorganisms in your GI tract that are overproducing gas, and that's putting pressure, making your abdomen super hard. That's a possibility. Fungus can do that, or mold, yeast can do that, and certain kinds of bacteria can do that as well. So get with your doctor and have those things looked at. How beneficial is bone broth soup for leaky gut? It's a good food, but at the end of the day, you should be eating healthy, good foods that you're not allergic to or sensitive to. But bone broth is not like a magic miracle food that's going to help heal you any more than any other food. Again, the point of food is to nourish your body, to provide nutrients for your body, to provide energy for your body so that it can heal and maintain and repair itself. All this rhetoric about superfoods, it's rhetoric. There's no such thing as a superfood. Any real food is super in the intent that God created it, and it's got all kinds of wonderful things about it. But there's no such thing as a superfood that's going to heal leaky gut, or a superfood that's going to heal your arthritis, or a magical berry from South America that all of a sudden is going to make all your problems go away. Generally speaking, all foods are super if they're real whole foods. And so they're all going to play a part in giving you good, solid nutrition to help you repair and heal, unless you're allergic or sensitive to that food. So I say that not to pick on you about the question on bone broth, but so many people think bone broth is the answer to their problems. And I've just not seen somebody just drink bone broth and fully heal, unless they healed because the only thing they did was bone broth. And by only doing bone broth, that's a gluten-free and a grain-free diet, and they were very gluten sensitive. And so by default, the bone broth helped them heal. But it wasn't the bone broth that healed them. It was going gluten-free that actually healed them, right? So but their perception of it was different. They think bone broth miraculously cured them, when in reality, just avoiding a poison was what helped their body heal and repair itself. Can a keto diet affect the kidneys? Any diet can affect the kidneys, but is a keto diet somehow unhealthful for kidney function? No. I mean, keto diets are perfectly fine. Say if you're really worried, if you have a history of kidney disease and you're going to go keto and you want to monitor your kidney function, just get with your doctor to monitor your creatinine and your blood urea nitrogen and your GFR, your glomerular filtration rate. Can you explain how the food sensitivity labs you offer are different? Yes. Most food sensitivity tests online are measuring IgG. IgG can be helpful, but the problem is these labs are not differentiating. There's different kinds of IgG. So you have what we would call protective IgG, which is an antibody that actually protects you from exposure. And then you have what's called harmful IgG. This is an antibody that's going to create an inflammatory response and inflammatory damage. If you're making protective antibodies to a food, it doesn't mean you're allergic to that food. It means you're creating protection so that you can get the nutrients from that food. And this is what those tests don't differentiate. That's why a lot of IgG tests, you get them back and you're allergic to everything you eat because you get a lot of false positive out of it, because you're making some protective antibodies to foods that you eat on a consistent basis. So if the test you're using doesn't differentiate friendly from detrimental antibodies, then you're getting this massive list of food reactions that you don't actually have. And now you're on a restrictive diet that's not necessary. We actually differentiate damaging antibodies from non-damaging antibodies. We also don't stop at just measuring IgG. We measure IgA and IgM. We measure immune complexes, and we measure T cell reactions directly. And so by doing a comprehensive evaluation of all of the delayed hypersensitivity pathways of your immune system, we have a much more robust and complete measurement and understanding of what your body actually reacts to, instead of false positives that are making you change your diet in an insane way where you don't know what to eat anymore. Again, this is why I know a lot of doctors aren't fans of IgG tests. A lot of mainstream doctors aren't. I'm not either, and I'm not mainstream by any stretch. But again, that's the differentiation, Gaia, between our test and what other online testing services offer. What do you think about green drinks? I have a green drink called Ultra Food VF, Sandra, and the biggest problem with green drinks is cross-contamination of gluten. A lot of them have wheatgrass, barley grass, oatgrass, etc. Those grasses like that you don't want. You don't want to drink grasses. Most of them are contaminated, or a lot of them are contaminated with gluten as a potential problem. So I don't recommend them. Ultra Food VF doesn't have any grasses in it. It's a mixture of reds and greens. So if you want a green drink, if it's something you really like in your diet, we have something like that for people who want to have that and not be exposed to the grasses. So again, that's my opinion, no matter what the grass drink is. Thyroglobulin antibodies came down from 240 to 170 after 7 months of grain and dairy free. Can I slowly introduce fermented dairy? I don't recommend introducing dairy unless you're being tested. I mean, the fact of the matter is the casein protein in dairy can mimic gluten, and it's super common for many people who react to gluten to also react to dairy. So if you're going to try to introduce like a fermented dairy, get tested first. And then if you're not reacting to dairy and you're also not lactose intolerant and you want to introduce some dairy, do so by introducing only A2 dairy. And if you don't know what that means, check out some of our posts and videos on A2 milk. Is there certain food we can eat to help put good bacteria or feed the good bacteria? All food is going to help feed good bacteria. All healthy, real food that's not contaminated with pesticides, herbicides, or other chemicals, Judy, are fuel for your microbiome. So it's not, again, there's not a superfood that's like, this is the only superfood that's going to give the bacteria in your gut the perfect balance. There's no such thing. Again, whole, real, organic food that's not contaminated is your best bet for a healthy and diverse microbiome. What's your opinion, please, on redox molecule supplement? I don't really comment on other brands of supplements. It's just not appropriate. If you don't have anything good to say, as the old saying goes, it's better to say nothing at all. Is there an alternative to glutamate? In what regard an alternative to glutamate? I don't know what you mean. Is sweet and low a disruptor like sucralose? Yeah, sweet and low is poison. So we have that link to that show and all the things that have been considered normal, but over the years, the longer they've been used, we now know they're poison. Margarita, I would encourage you to watch this show. A lot of the things that food marketing and the government has said, do this instead of that, they're almost everything historically has been inaccurate and wrong. And it's just really, it boils down to people trying to sell you something you don't need under the guise that it's going to either help you or solve a problem that you have. That's called marketing. And sweet and low falls in that criteria. But we did a whole video show on the history of government agencies and doctors making recommendations that we now, after subjecting humans to horrible toxins over years, we now have enough data that says, hey, that was bad advice. So at any rate, it might help you, Margarita, to watch that video. My grandpa says when he takes B12, it hurts his kidneys. Why would that happen? I mean, there could be something in it, Polly, that his body doesn't do well with. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of factors there. I mean, some products, contain ingredients that people are reactive to, and that might just be your grandfather's way of, his body's way of being intelligent about it. So, again, if he needs B12, if he's low on B12 and he's trying to take it to correct a deficiency, he might just try another brand or consider a different product altogether. Was advised to go carnivore to heal my leaky gut since I react to so many plant foods after being vegan, but I'm suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome and it was too hard for my body. Any advice on how to go about it? Yeah, get out of the mold. If you've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, the likelihood that you have mold is higher than 93%, and you're probably living in mold. One of the reasons people have success on the carnivore diet is all the plant-based foods have a compound in them called oxalate. Oxalates are these little tiny molecular crystal shards that can cut you internally. They can basically damage and create inflammatory damage to your tissues. And a lot of plant-based foods contain higher levels of oxalates, things like spinach and almonds, things like beets and other dark green leafies. Now, that doesn't mean these foods are necessarily inherently bad for people, but if you're in mold, one of the reasons you develop intolerance to plant-based foods is because mold produces oxalates, and you can be exposed to high level of oxalate and it can overwhelm your body's ability to rid yourself of oxalate if you're eating a high oxalate diet, but you're also in environmental mold exposure. So get out of the mold. That's my opinion of most of the carnivore group. And that, again, there's some great intelligent minds out there promoting carnivore diets and seeing wonderful things happen. So no discredit to any of those individuals. But I would argue if I could have a personal conversation with a lot of these people, we would identify a source of environmental mold that they were exposed to that is the reason why the carnivore diet led to such great improvements in their health. I have seen this countless times in my clinic. And ultimately what happens to a lot of folks that do originally go carnivore is when they get out of the mold and they get the oxalates cleaned out, they can now start reintroducing and diversifying their diet a little bit better. But at any rate, to answer your question, is if you've been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, if you've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia and you have not fully vetted whether or not you have a mold problem, you need to do that immediately. And I'm not talking about hiring a mold inspector to come out and do a simple air test. I'm talking about getting somebody to come out and do a forensic evaluation of your home to identify where the mold is and why the mold is growing, because the likelihood that mold is the driving force behind your problem is very, very high. In my genetic test, I have one gene for celiac in the HLA-DQ beta-1 gene. Does that confirm I have that disease? No, genetic testing doesn't tell you whether you have celiac disease. Genetic testing tells you whether you have predisposition to reacting to gluten. They're two very different things. You might want to attend one of our webinars on HLA-DQ analysis. And you also might want to take our free glutenology masterclass to understand the genetics of this better. I weigh 108 and 5'5". My doctor says I need 1,200 grams. Well, I would argue 1,200 grams of calcium or 1,200 milligrams of calcium. I would argue that you don't need 1,200 grams of calcium, Laurie. Do you agree? And how do I get this with no dairy? I have osteoporosis. Did your doctor check your calcium level? Because your doctor can't make the claim on how much calcium a day that you need to take as a supplemental beyond your diet if they're not measuring your status. And so the best way to know would be to measure your status first. Most GPs that I've that I've worked with, and I'm working, they're working with my clients, and they don't understand nutrition very well. And that's not to say that yours didn't. It's just that, well, if they're telling you 1,200 grams of calcium, they don't understand nutrition because they're going to kill you. But maybe that's just a typo. At any rate, you got to get tested. That's the way you assess your need for calcium, is you test and you take if you need, or you incorporate more in your diet. If you're trying to eat more calcium in your diet and you're not using dairy, one of the best ways to do that is pressure cooked fish. The bones are pressure cooked, and so they're soft and they're very rich in calcium. So things like sardine and salmon are a good way to get excellent calcium in your diet. Can leaky gut cause candida? It's not so much that leaky gut causes candida as much as candida causes leaky gut. As far as getting rid of candida, go back. I just did a very comprehensive breakdown on candida, and go check that show out. There's a lot of things to unpack in terms of answering that question that we can't answer today. But if you go watch that show, we'll put a link in the commentary below for you. My doctor encouraged me to avoid gluten even after my leaky gut heals. My issue with gluten was itchy skin, rash, and disappeared after going gluten-free. Would you agree? I would say, Jacqueline, that have you been tested to see if you're gluten sensitive? Your doctor's probably giving you good advice there. If you were eating gluten and it was causing that kind of a problem, and not eating it, that problem resolved, why would you want to introduce it again? Because that problem is just going to come back. Think of it like a diabetic. If you quit eating sugar and exercise and your diabetes goes away, does that mean that you can now stop exercising and start eating sugar again? right? Persistent behavior over time is what equates to a good or a bad result. And if you're truly gluten sensitive, then adding it back into your diet after you heal is only going to create a disease state for you in your future. So the way to really truly confirm the answer to that question is to go get genetically tested for gluten sensitivity. And that'll give you an answer as to whether keeping gluten out of your diet is the right thing to do indefinitely. Oh man, so many questions in so little time. Look, I'm gonna take one more here. Had a finger prick blood test for food allergies. I assume food allergies. Said I was allergic to everything I eat most often. Does this mean I'm allergic to those foods? No. Part of it just depends on what kind of test was it. A finger prick test probably was either an IgE or an IgG test. And although IgE tests are decently accurate in terms of finding acute allergies, IgG tests for finger prick tests, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. I'd throw the result in the garbage. That's my opinion on IgG. If you want to rewind this video, I did a little bit more in-depth conversation earlier. Okay, I've got to go. Thank you so much for joining me today for Pick Dr. Osborne's Brain. As always, if you're new to the show and you want to learn more about what we're doing, come visit me at glutenfreesociety.org. If you sign up for our newsletter there, I'll send you a bunch of fantastic free information on how to navigate your health and your nutrition to overcome autoimmunity and other unhealthy problems. If you also are new to the show and don't know of our mission, it's to save 100 million lives. And the only way we do that is sharing of information. So if you found something today useful in your life or helpful for you that I discussed, if you learned something new today that you think would benefit someone you know or love, please share it with them, and together we can change the health of the world. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here next Tuesday night at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time for an episode of the Dr. Osborne Zone. And we'll be back next Thursday for another live Q&A.